Welcome to This Human Life with the Philosophical Coach. I'm thrilled to have you tuning in. I'm your host, Sam Kilgathis, aka the Philosophical Coach, philosopher, human expert, and high-performance coach. This podcast at its core is about navigating the complexities of being human, whilst providing you the opportunity to go beyond any conception of who you think you are really. Inside of the freedom that comes from not being attached to figuring out your true purpose, or who you are, is an opening for creating a life free from constraint. If that intrigues or excites you, then you're definitely in the right place. The ideas are drawn from neuroscience, philosophy, my coaching practice, working with elite leaders, and experience. You can expect candor, humor, vulnerability, and ideas which are unfamiliar to you, and some you may just plain disagree with. You'll also get the opportunity to hear from inspiring coaches and leaders. Now let's get ready to question what we know. In this episode, you're going to learn about creating a life free from constraint. But you're going to look at this from a warts and all perspective. And that's going to include all the things which got in the way of creating this life in the first place. Now, if you've listened to previous episodes, you'll know that one of my breaking points where I thought this is never going to happen was when my partner walked out on me 15 days before I was meant to complete the draft and send it to my supervisor. Now, that was the mindset that I was stuck in for a few days. And then what happened is I got fed up. I got fed up with being a victim, essentially. I wasn't going to allow the circumstance to dictate what my future was going to be. I had the opportunity to choose. I could choose to stay in the wallowing, choose to stay in the despair and the heartbreak, or I could do something different. And I chose to do something different because I have a fed up factor. I get to a point, whether it's with my health or it's my fitness, where I just get fed up. I get fed up with not taking responsibility for something in my life. And on this occasion, the responsibility was around the thesis. And although I had mentors and I had people and family supporting me through heartbreak, what actually made the difference was music. What made the difference was a song which I came across by an artist called Andy Grammer, who you may know or you may not. And he has a song which is called Don't Give Up on Me. And for whatever reason, this song spoke to me. It spoke to me in a way which was profound. And I'm going to share some of these lyrics because the power of language to create our reality is so profound. 4 years ago, I had no idea that this was the case. But when we speak into the world we want to create, we get to create that more times than not. And so when Andy Grammer said, I will fight for you, I heard someone was listening to where I was at and was ready to be by my side. And when they said, because I'm not giving up, giving up, no, not yet, even when I'm down to my last breath, I said that to myself repeatedly, over and over. I'd be out on a run and I would be listening to this song on repeat. I'd be out on a run listening to this song on repeat because this message was what my brain needed to hear. My brain needed to get out of the predictive system which it was in, where it was creating habits called, you're not going to make it. It's not going to work out for you, kid. To, I'm not giving up on you. Even when nobody else believes, I'm not going down that easily. So don't give up on me. And I kept telling myself that. And I listened to this song on repeat for at least 12 hours a day for a month. And to me, that speaks to the transformational power of music. And Andy Grammer, thank you for creating that song, because seriously, you do not know how much of a service you did for me. I started living into a viewpoint that I wasn't going to give up, no matter what. And inside of that viewpoint, things started to really shift. I started to take on the task of actually completing the thesis. And I was so calm. I was working 12 hours a day, but this wasn't the Sam who was working 4 years ago on the thesis, who had papers spread out all across the table, all across the room, piles high, and was, to be honest, going out of his tree. No, I was so clear, so in flow, and I was enjoying the process. I was falling in love again with work I'd been doing for 10 years. But even though I was in flow, I was in somewhat denial. I was in denial of the fact that there was still more to do. Yes, I could have got it done within the time that was left, but I hadn't given my supervisor a chance to read it, and I was going to submit it anyway, because that was what there was to do, and that's the only option I saw. And then I spoke to my supervisor, and he said, I wonder if there's a different option. I wonder if we can ask Oxford to remove your status as a student and for you to return when the thesis is done. And I was really reluctant to even consider this option because I had so much momentum. And I had a fear that if I didn't have a date, which was my target or the end date, then it would just keep going on and on. But I listened to what my supervisor said, and I went for the option of suspending, well, actually stopping being a student. And it seemed like a smart thing to do. And I think it probably was a smart thing to do, to be honest. The only problem was I lost all momentum. I went from having so much clarity and just knowing exactly what there was to be done to finish to just being unable, it seemed, to get back in the headspace because there was no pressure, so to speak, which was propelling me forward. Now, I want to ask, have you ever felt like you needed pressure to perform? And if you have, then I think what's behind that is really simple. It's a habit. It's not because there's a truth of the matter that you actually need pressure to perform. If you looked, I'm sure there are moments in your life where you didn't need pressure and you performed anyway. And yet we see the mythology persist that we need pressure to perform. And I certainly fell into this category over and over again. But here's what I've learned. I didn't need pressure to perform. What I needed was an accountability system. I needed to be accountable, and I needed someone to hold me to account. See, the pattern that I fell into repeatedly and was not really creating any accountability. By not creating accountability, I was able to avoid taking responsibility. I wasn't responsible for my experiences of the circumstances. And so even after I'd sent off the thesis, imperfect though it was, to my supervisor in February of last year, I wasn't a demand on him to read the thesis. I wasn't on demand of him to get feedback at all. And so I allowed time to drift, and I gave him the impression that someone else could read the thesis first. And the issue with this is that this other person had no accountability to do this. This wasn't their role. Instead, any willingness to do so was supererogatory and being done on top of the demands of being a world-leading academic. So what was the impact in this case of not taking responsibility? Well, it got to be a year without touching the PhD. And it got to a point where I kept telling myself, I just don't care anymore about this work. I don't know why I should care about the world of jurisprudence. I was committed to making a difference to people in their lives in what really mattered. And so when the job of a lifetime came up, I took it. I took on what was going to be a 5-year contract, even though the job scared the hell out of me, even though I knew that to be able to do it, I was going to have to grow into a human being that I never knew myself to be. But when I did that, I did that thinking, oh, I could still get the PhD done no matter what. And what was happening there, and this is something I've learned in the last year, I hadn't done the looking. I just said that something was going to happen, but I hadn't actually looked or seen what it was going to take for that to take place, for that to transpire. Have you ever said to someone, oh yeah, I'll do that, but not actually looked at what it's going to take to bring that to fruition? Well, if you have, that's because there's this way in which we operate as a default context in life. And that's that we promise without seeing what something's going to take. We don't look at really what it's going to take to get something done. We just say it inside of looking good or avoid or wanting to not look bad. Even before I started again. I started again because what was in my space was I was working in an environment where I saw that who I was someone who didn't complete things. I wasn't oriented around completion. And the evidence was clear. I had this thesis ongoing since sometime in October 2011. I was living into this future called Sam doesn't complete things. And so I shifted into this person who started completing everything that I was out to accomplish. Everything I was out to accomplish in the world of what I want to do in relationships. Everything I want to accomplish in the world of the job that I was in. And it was extraordinary. But I still was in a space of, if I stay in this job, I'm never going to finish this. I'm never going to finish this thesis. And I'll live with the regret that I could have. And so I resigned. And I was pretty clear, I can do this. I can do this in a week. That was the crazy thought that I had. Despite not really working on something for over a year, I was just going to be able to pick up the pieces and bust it out in a week. No. And so then I had to come back and say, I didn't complete it again. And when I experienced not completing it again, it was a heavy feeling. It was heavy because I had been promising over and over again to countless different people that I was going to finish this thing and not doing it. And who I'd become is someone who was really interested in being a person of their word. And it started to create that in all these different areas of life, except for this. And it was a constraint. And as I created a business which was modeled around creating freedom from constraint for you, I felt the constraint even more. I felt like a charlatan. How could I say that I'm going to create a life where you get to how can I say that I'm going to provide you an opportunity to create a life free from constraint when I have still got this hanging over my head? And that was actually the context to shift things again. Because it wasn't about me anymore. Because I could see that my commitment to others was the only thing at this stage which was going to propel me forward. If it's about me, I don't really care, is the truth of the matter. Because it's not a big enough game. What drives me forward day in, day out is the opportunity to make a difference to one person. Always at least one person in a day. And ideally multiple. But it's the desire to be someone who makes a difference to others from which I live my life. But the PhD seemed so self-consumed and all about me. And I kept telling myself, I don't care about this. I don't care about this. And yet the experience of life was getting more and more constrained. And I was going from a place where I'd discovered a level of peace of mind, which I'd never experienced in my life, to taking on that, oh, I'm my thoughts, I'm my feelings, I'm these bodily sensations. All the stuff which I'd been trained to not come from was becoming the reality that I was living into. And I remember the conversation which started to shift that. Sam, you're either completing the thesis or you're not. And it's okay if you're not, but you just get serious with yourself. Get serious with yourself of what you're doing, because that's what's going to create peace of mind. And when my coach was telling me this, I had to look and see for myself, yeah, I'm kidding myself. I'm not completing this at all. I'm just spending time on this project. And I've got to admit, even though I saw this, it still took me a while to really shift the goalpost on this one. And there were still countless times where I doubted that I would ever complete the thesis, because fear got in my way over and over again. And it really took the level of coaching that got me out of the way, that got Sam out of the equation and back to, what's this about? And I started to live into the possibility again. This is about creating a society where law is in the interest of society. But what's bigger than that? Well, I'm committed to creating a book on the human condition, which is around people creating a life of discovery, creating a life of wonder, a life where they get to experience a level of freedom which they didn't see as possible. And if that's going to happen, then I've got to be the example. Otherwise, there will be someone who I won't be able to look in the eye and say, you know what, this is what you want to create. I can help you get there. I'll have to say, I can help you get there as long as it's not this. And that thought sat so uncomfortably. I couldn't bear it anymore. I just got fed up. I got fed up with the bullshit. I got fed up with not taking responsibility for my life. Not for my PhD, I mean for my life. This was starting to impact every area of my life. And I wasn't doing anything to take responsibility for it. And I don't mean responsibility in terms of blame and shame and guilt, all that crap. I mean responsibility in creating power in any circumstance. And here was a circumstance where I was giving away my power day in, day out. I wasn't creating the life that I loved anymore. And so I started taking uncomfortable action. I started looking as a research experiment, okay, when I'm in a low motivational state, what is it which drives me back? How do I create flow when I don't want to do this? So I started doing challenges. I started, doing hundreds of push-ups a day and seeing how I could interrupt the sets and work on something in between. And then I would see how that would create a creative flow, and then that would have an ongoing effect. And from that ongoing effect, I'd be ready to work. And so I would keep playing with this process and recording and seeing what makes the difference, what brings me to a place where there's ease and calm and excitement and joy, all the things which bring me forward and into action in the uncomfortable space. But it wasn't until really recently that I got my next level of what transformation looks like. What transformation looks like is creating the space for another to get themselves out of the way, to let go of their fear and their limiting beliefs. And in this case, it was just a colleague who kept calling to see what was the state of play with the thesis. And I didn't want to pick up because I was feeling despondent that this was still going on. But when he called multiple times, I picked up. I said what was so. I said what the reality of things was. He listened. And then he did something remarkable. He stayed on the phone. He stayed on the phone on mute, probably for about an hour and a half. And inside of that, I became a different human being. I got his commitment to me. I got his love for me. And I just decided, all right, the time is now. And the action which I took next was an action I hadn't taken across the entirety of the PhD, not once. Rather than starting a new draft, rather than working on multiple versions of chapters, I cut out all of the excess in the thesis. Cut out 25,000 words in half an hour, because then I could see what was there left to play with. You see, because I'd spent so long on this, I wanted to include everything. And maybe you can relate to this. Maybe there's been a time where you've spent so long on something that you felt like unless it was perfect, it wouldn't have been worth the time. Unless it really captured everything that the journey had been, it wouldn't have been worth the time. That was the way I was operating. I was operating from, I have to prove that this has been worth the time I've spent on it. And when I got that, when I got truthful with myself, because I'm ashamed that it's taken me this long, then there was an opportunity to shift. There was an opportunity to shift into the world of performance. And what that looked like was, all right, I've now got 30,000 words to play with. But I don't need all of that. I don't need all of this because this isn't the last line in the play, as my friend Jason Goldberg would say. And I'm no longer attached to having to say everything for this to be complete. In fact, what makes this complete is literally that it's sent off with all the chapters, all the sentences intact, every part complete. Complete was not how much stuff can you cram into a 100,000 word thesis. And yet I'd been making up that because I'd spent time on this, that time meant I needed to say more. It was the opposite. I needed to be okay with saying less. And what's so remarkable when I look at this is that this is literally what one is seeking to do when you're coaching. You're seeking to take away what is in the way of someone having freedom in that area. And what I was doing was to keep putting new things in my way so that I couldn't have freedom in that area. I kept creating new things. So then I had to analyze whether this thing was working and this thing was working and this thing was working, or maybe this part's working and this part's not working. It was a mind fuck. But when I stripped it all away, when I saw I don't have to say all of this for this to be complete, then I propelled forward to the finish line at a pace which I hadn't been at for over a year. And even when I was so close to finishing, there was still fear which came up. And I share this with you because sometimes we're looking to escape fear. We're looking to create a situation where fear doesn't arise. But that doesn't happen, or rarely happens. The fear is there, and yet we take courageous action anyway. The fear is there of sending this thing which you've become like a freaking child. A child that everyone knows in all your different circles of life. A child that everyone asks about when you see them. A child which people get confused when you're saying, I'm not working on the thesis anymore. They feel like you're a neglected parent. No matter what I was doing in my life, people were still listening from what's happening with the PhD. And that's where getting responsible really hit me. for me to make the impact I want to make in the world, I had to get responsible for the listening that people had of me. Otherwise, everything would just be window dressing on a mud house, and that would scream of inauthenticity. And when I knew that I really had this, when I knew that I'd turned the corner for good, was when someone asked me again, "What's happening with that PhD?" And I said, "You'll find out about it soon in the podcast and the process I've taken to completing it." I hadn't completed it at that stage, but I knew that I would. And I knew that by declaring that, this time it was going to happen. And now here's the thing. When I say I've completed the thesis, let me be completely transparent with you. I haven't been awarded the PhD. I haven't even resubmitted the thesis to Oxford. What I've done is I've sent the complete thesis to my supervisor. And that may lead you to think, oh, why are you celebrating that? And here's what I've learned. We have a fucked up idea of accomplishment. Throughout the journey of a graduate student, it's so common for them to experience not accomplishing anything. Even when they finished a chapter, they're already on to the next thing. I used to coach people who they'd finish a degree and they're already on to the next degree. And you can see this in other areas of life. It's not, special to academia. Accomplishment is something you can create as a daily experience, and is what, in working with leading transformation leaders of the last 50 years, has allowed me to see, is that a person who creates a life which is free from constraint, where they create power in any circumstance, is someone who is living into a future where they're oriented around completing, and accomplishment is a daily thing. You can start this right now for yourself. You can start to look, what are you going to accomplish tomorrow? And you can create occasions in your calendar to do that. You can create a future where you walk backwards. You can create a future from the future where you state what's been accomplished. And then you get to take the steps to bring that to fruition. Not from a place of attachment, not from a place of in order to. No, from a place of who I am really is someone who is my word. And even when I can't keep my word, I'm going to honor it. Because the rest of it, I have very little control over. I have control over what I say and what I don't say. The thoughts, the emotions, the mental states, the bodily sensations, that's all automatic. And if that's all automatic, then if I'm going to really get to who I am really, I've got to look at my word. And now that I take that seriously, there's a level of performance which is present in my life which has never been present before. There's a level of drive which has never been present before. And so I'll celebrate when the thesis gets submitted, because that's an accomplishment. And I'll celebrate when the thesis is defended, because that's an accomplishment. But I won't ever go back to a view that I haven't accomplished something until I've got there. Accomplishment for me is now a daily routine, and it creates an experience and an aliveness which makes life worth living. It makes it exciting to get up each day and to look at what's next. And if you want to alter in the most profound way your experience of yourself, then live into who you are as someone who accomplishes, who you are as someone who completes, whatever that is for you. Because when you do, no matter how high up the level of personal development or what you've created in your career, your experience of yourself will exponentially grow. How do I know? Because there is no top. There's always an opportunity for growth if you're ready to look for it. if you're willing to stand in the question of what would that look like now? What would that look like for me? And it's standing in this mode of questioning all the things that we take for granted, all the things that we know, which brings the kind of simplicity to life, which usually feels unattainable. We get so stuck in life in acquiring knowledge. We get taught that knowledge is such an essential component of what it is to succeed. And there are constant bombardments of knowledge business, perceptions of knowledge being portrayed out into the world, out into our inboxes. I don't come from that anymore. This is my perception. That's all it is. It's my perception. But what I can speak from is the difference it's made. I've got to create a life that I truly love, despite the setbacks, despite the pain, despite the doubts, despite the fear. And if I can do that, then believe me, so can you. So going forward, that is what I'll be looking to share. I will be looking to share how you can create a life free from constraint in any area of life that's important to you. Because that's what drives me forward every day. Whether you're a relative veteran of this podcast or a new listener, I really thank you for taking the time to listen. And if you've got value from this podcast, then it would mean the world to me if you rate and review it on Apple or Podchaser and share it with your community so that this work can impact more people. Because I'm on a mission to help people live a life free from constraints. And if you're ready to take this from information to transformation, then connect with us at thePhilosophicalCoach.com.